But all of this was merely a diversion, so that no one would notice something else. The death of the Lightborn had set something into motion, a clockwork. Having long stood still, its gears now once again slowly began to turn. This is the story of someone who wanted to be free.
After being thrown off the morning dew, we wake up stranded on a secluded beach, with our only exit through an ancient temple. This is a building of the Pyreans, the abandoned temple, only the first of many Pyrean ruins we will encounter. And the ruin from our vision, as our character immediately recognizes. A melody, now familiar, welcomes us in this eerie place. Just as in our vision, we find here a beacon, the first beacon of our story. But why is there a beacon here? What is really this place? The abandoned temple is quite a big structure, and before we get to the room with the beacon, we find two smaller rooms. One has blue crystals, and a magical looking platform with seats. It looks like a council room, but stepping on the platform increases our arcane fever. Maybe a Pyrean training for fever resistance? The other room is in worse condition, half submerged by a mathlight, but we find here the key of the forgotten temple. A key which does not seem to open anything inside this place. The key opens a door of another part of this complex that we can reach if we just go right after reaching the outside, but we can also just come back and climb the hill later in the game. Inside is another huge dungeon, which may prove a little too much for a first time player, but one that definitely rewards the effort. However, the Forgotten Temple is more than just loot. First we enter what seems a large natural cave with wooden bridges, reaching to the various levels. With some jumping we can get to what seems a water channel or a maintenance corridor leading to a second room. The structure here is in good state, and we can easily kill the spiders and proceed. But it is here in a corner that we find a small stone tablet. The stairs lead to a third room, where it gets interesting, as some spiky crystals start appearing around. And on one side of this room, a second stone tablet. And this is here to be noticed. On the other side of the room there's a door we cannot open, but we can go around it, to find a first stone tablet. The temple goes on and on, with more corridors, spiders, and the spiky blue crystals, plus a beautiful water slide at the end. But there are no indications of what these tablets could be. If we look at their style, and I know I didn't show you enough ruins yet for you to see it, but we'll get there, these stone tablets look Ishyian. Of course I'm thinking of the mythical Ishyian tablets we read about in the Legacy of the Pyreans. But this was before I also started to recognize the architectural styles, and didn't know yet that the abandoned temple and the forgotten temple are actually Dilgar. So these are probably not the tablets we are looking for, but they still seem important. What are they? Well, here comes one of the challenges of this investigation. Many things that we see in Pyrean ruins are actually a relic of removed content. We can read about it in a very detailed series of posts by Matania Hauptmann, someone who explored unfinished dungeons and normally inaccessible content while he was still included in Enderal, and shared his research on the SureAI forum. And what he found is amazing. I'll show you only about the Forgotten Temple, which he explores in his 9th post, but you'll find the link in the description. Part of the main quest was supposed to find place here. We would have maybe seen an echo of the Pyrean prophet with the Empress, and we should have discovered that the Pyreans researched the ruins of the civilization before them to find more about the cycle, just as we are doing. And we would have read about their investigations in the 3 stone tablets that we found. The first inscription said, "There is still hope. We had done everything and hoped that it will suffice. Nevertheless, this is part of our message to everything that is yet to come. The pattern was never broken. The society grew, civilization consolidated, surpassing even its gods and their rulers, and passed without leaving anybody behind, or even a message where whole nations disappeared." The second one. "There do not seem to be any global signs of war, disease or annihilation. They were just gone. It is the shadow of existence. A dominant constant, always the same pattern. The patterns are too similar to be coincidental. Hope is part of a pattern. Where there are high hopes are always great fears. Hope is an ideal reflective surface for the fears of a whole nation. This fear inevitably leads to the power struggles typical of our society. For gods or against them. For rulers or against them. To be able to endure the fear, control is needed." And the third description. "This is the reason for the recurring power struggles of our world, which must draw in the old patterns. Using, manipulating and controlling people to maintain their own hopes. The pattern is passed on to societies, religions or whole nations. The restrictive behavior under which one civilization has suffered is passed on to others. Breaking this pattern could change everything, creating a whole new society. There is still hope." Why am I showing you this, apart from my obsession with ancient writings? Because it reminds me of the last part of Lishari's book, where it says that the Pyreans might have been killed to restore the balance. Because it tells us that hope and fear are fundamental ingredients of the cycle. And because it shows how much of what has been built for Enderal didn't make it into the final game. The rest of his temple is also very interesting. There is again what seems a council room, and Matania writes there was an animation here. There's also a room with many copies of the key for the place we are already in. Why so many? And after this we would have found a whole hidden citadel, which is actually seen in one of the first Enderal trailers. Something that reminds of the city of 1,000 floods. Maybe the last missions of Enderal were supposed to take place here, but it was later changed because we are trapped in Ark by the enemy siege. Maybe the beacon of the abandoned temple is also what remains of this initial narrative. But we shouldn't give too much weight to cut content. It's been cut for a reason. The answer to the mysteries of this first ruin is actually simple, but getting there is not. You guessed right, we need to understand more about the Pyreans, starting with their architecture. The Sun Coast is full of Pyrean ruins, and if we look at their style, we see they're actually similar to what we've seen until now. They are Dilgar. And all the towers constellating the vast landscape of the Powder Desert, they also are Dilgar. This whole architectural search seems to point out that maybe Enderal and Olvin was split between Ishyian and Dilgar. The ruins we visited with Ishyian in the first part, or Ashengrad and Old Oldulgrad, are also Dilgar. Were the Heartlands under control of a Dilgar? Just east of Old Oldulgrad there is a small ruin called Old Olesh, which we visit to find a Pyrean urn during the quest trails of the past. In this ruin we find a lost embalmer equipping the best bow we can find in early game, the bow of the Ishyian. This place was a funeral home, a building of the Ishyian used for embalming. Which is also why we find so many Pyrean lost ones. Their tradition was to preserve the bodies, similar to what the ancient Egyptians did. We also find a little chapel outside, probably used for funerary rites, in the same style of the ruins found under the Living Temple. But here I had the first doubts. Old Dotulgrad and Old Olesh are close to each other, and from the outside they actually look the same.
Look, over there. That must be the ruin.
They both look Ishyian. But as soon as we enter Old Dotulgrad, we see a corridor in Dilgar style. Old Dotulgrad is a strange place, an Ishyian building giving access to a Dilgar complex. Enough to make me think that maybe this point of the two different styles wasn't implemented in the game, that was only referenced in the book, just like the myth of Urus and Mirani. But the reality is different. Ishyian and Dilgar were collaborating, living close to each other, and we will see more examples of ruins where a part is Dilgar and another is Ishyian. The Sun Coast and the Powder Desert also have Ishyian ruins here and there, as we are going to see, but I think it's good to start simple. The area of the Crystal Forest contains just 4 ruins, and we already visited one. The next one, Old Miskamur, seems a continuation of a Living Temple, surrounded by the pink trees and built inside the same mountain. This is the Run or Die building, where we had to find 3 levers and a final one to reach the room with Miskamur himself. Or we can just let Miskamur taste his medicine. What is really this place, I don't know. There are various traps and inner canals where we also find a metallic boat. But what we know is that the style is definitely Dilgar, and this is not part of a Living Temple. Maybe it was connected to it, further inside the mountain, through corridors and stairs that are now blocked by ice, but this is all we can visit, and it's already a big place. However, just as we experience in the Living Temple, Old Miskamur seems to be some sort of test or trial, and to complete it we need again to reach the light. And of course to grab the Pyrean cube for the Trails of the Past, a quest that keeps bringing us to interesting places. North of Old Miskamur we find a more straightforward ruin, an aqueduct bringing water from the Frostcliff Mountains to the valley below. It is a camp of wild mages. Between them there's also Gargantua, a former pupil of Constantine Firespark, now wanted in Ark. There is a trapdoor we cannot open. Maybe we were meant to discover something more underground. But the style of this place seems different from what we have explored until now. We know there are only 2 architectural styles, and this one cannot definitely be Dilgar, so it must be Ishyian. There are other places with similar architecture, like the Norgrave in the Frostcliff Mountains, and Tur in the Heartlands, west of Old Rashengrad. These places use the style of Nordic ruins in Skyrim, and if we look back at the Living Temple, we can see some of these Nordic elements too. Of course the ruins of Enderal reflect the 2 architectural styles of the ruins of Skyrim, the Dwemer for the Dilgar and the Nordic for the Ishyian. It is not always one-on-one. Ishyian ruins can be just plain, and we see sometimes Nordic elements in Dilgar ruins. We cannot judge from just arches and decorations. Statues are also not a good reference. The same ones can be found in both types of ruins. But if we look at the overall architecture of the places we visit, we can always determine if they are Ishyian or Dilgar. And now the fun can start. We have one last ruin to visit in this area, although officially it is not part of the Crystal Forest. The pink trees and crystals do not go all around the mountain of the Living Temple, but strangely stop when we approach Old Atolis, and the crystals turn blue. The influence of the Living Temple does not reach beyond this point, apart from some crystal elementals. Old Atolis is an imposing place, and already from the colonnade and rough walls we can guess who built it. And there's a surprise. Nerimi's soldiers are guarding the entrance. The whole ruin is swarming with them. Inside we also find that the Nerimis had killed 3 keepers of the Holy Order. What are they all doing here? The ruin begins with a small room, leading to two large interconnected rooms, the summit halls, a place frozen in time. Spiders of all sizes are infesting the place, and as we take the door to the rock pass, we see the Veneremists are still fighting the spiders, so they must have got here recently. There are more arches here like we saw in the Living Temple. This whole place is certainly Ishyian. In the next area we find more soldiers and an explanation of the circumstances. The Holy Order sent a covey of keepers and an arcanist into the ruin. The heart of the Pyrean site is in a glacier. This is the backside of a mountain which people here call the Living Temple. Taranor wants to know what they are looking for here. Taylor ordered various archaeological expeditions all around the ruins of Enderal, but the only successful two are the ones we arrived just in time to save. Holdatolis is one of his failed expeditions, and shows us why the Holy Order ends up with so little information about the Pyreans. This is definitely a place with some secrets, catching the interest of both Taylor and Taranor. Starting with this very room. It's not easy to notice as we have Veneremist soldiers to worry about, but when we enter the glacier passage we hear a faint voice. What was that? Let's hear it again. A stranger, look at us. A ghostly presence? No, this ruin is Ishyian, and Constantine told us their specialty was binding souls to places or objects. We are inside a living temple, and that's also why the crystal forest does not touch Holdatolis. But this place still goes on, and we enter another rock path leading to one last room, the Ice King Hall. A scientist, the leader of an Veneremist expedition, is here observing what seems the only thing of interest, a throne with the skeleton of a giant warrior, the Ice King. But it's also interesting to note how the walls look different from the rest of Holdatolis, neither Ishyian nor Dilgar. Was this a Pyrean king, ruling over this region on behalf of the Sun Priests? The victims of the Pyrean cleansing are of normal human size, and the skeleton is big. The Ice King was clearly something else. There is only another place in Enderal where we find something comparable, the throne of the Thor King, inside the Gravespath. This place is also an Ishyian ruin, a tomb, a common theme for the Ishyian, an aspect that together with their embalming rituals and the binding techniques suggests a cult of the ancestors. The Gravespath was probably a larger place in Pyrean times, as the part we can visit is very small, not worth having a guardian as the Thor King. Because despite its name, he wasn't here to rule. In his strongbox, a testament and a key. Here I sit and wait, a king of thorns and roots, of golden leaves and tendrils, a giant of the old world, a servant of the old folk of Ishyian. I am the last offspring of the East and the last of my kind. The solitude of these halls weighs heavily upon me, for no one enters these halls anymore. To guard the dead is my duty, yet as long as I stay, they remain calm and silent and nobody is here to talk to me. I wait. I wait for the return of the old folk. I still sense their echoes. Nevertheless, once I'm allowed to live after 1,000 years, their echoes will fade and I will be redeemed. By the time I am released, the dead will walk once more, awoken from their peaceful slumber. As with the faded echo, the morning will be long gone. The years are sapping my bones. Soon, soon it will be done. A king of thorns and roots, a giant of the old world, and the last of my kind. We know the Pyreans were all part of one race, and they were not giants. We also know that the Pyrean cycle went in great steps just like our cycle. 2 ages, split by a great cataclysm.
I see why you would say that, and I've felt the same way for a very long time too. But there came a moment when we simply could not deny it anymore. We began to study the history of the Pyreans more intensely, and the parallels were extraordinary. In its early days, the Pyrean Empire was split up by a disaster, just like Vin was split up by the Starfall after the reign of the Eterna. Also, the Pyreans had a ruling caste who declared themselves gods after the catastrophe. The 2 castes of the Sun Priest.
For us it was the age of Asateron, ended by the Starfall and followed by the age of the Lightborn. For the Pyreans, it was the age of the Giants, ended by an unknown cataclysm and followed by the age of the Sun Priests. In our cycle, the Ash People and the Eterna, both created by Asateron, blended after Starfall, resulting in the current civilizations. It wasn't the same for the Pyreans. The remaining giants were enslaved by the Ishyian. The duty of the Thorn King was to guard the dead in case they would wake up, something rare before the start of the cleansing but still happening, because the Pyreans did not burn their dead. And that is where the grotesque lost ones come from. They are zombie giants. What we see suggests there were more types of giants, and I had to wonder who created them. The Thorn King calls himself the last offspring of the East, and the last of his people. The Ice King is still found in his own royal hall. He must have died before the enslavement, still king of his people, the giants of the West. Not only. While the Dilgar use machines powered by crystals to shape their buildings, the Ishyian use the labor of the giants, which explains the impressive constructions but still very unpolished compared to the Dilgar. The Ishyian value tradition, the Dilgar value progress. But this isn't the only reason why we're visiting the Gravespath. It hides much more about the Pyreans. Outside the entrance of the Gravespath we find the first page of a journal of the apothecary, which triggers a most baffling quest, like newly born. Day 13 since my departure. I beg of you, O Malphas, let me find a remedy, at least a way of alleviation, a possibility to decelerate the progress of this illness, anything that carves the onset. At the Abbey, we worry every day that an envoy might reach us with news of yet another case in the capital. But this fever, this madness, we do not know how to stop it. I cannot accept this. After extensive studies and research, I found all Pyrean records that mention an herbal extract. The Pyreans use this extract to clear the mind of anything disruptive, a possible antidote. If the narratives are to be trusted, the Pyreans did not fall victim to the Red Menace. A civilization that grand and mighty could very well have possessed the means necessary to put an end to this horror. Fortunately, I have finally arrived at my destination. I have reached the Gravespath. This is where the old Pyrean ruins are supposed to be located. If Malphas wills it, I might finally find a remedy here. I will rest one more night, and then set out to unveil the secrets of these ruins. So this apothecarius was searching the Gravespath for a cure to the Red Menace, because it is said that the Pyreans did not suffer from it. The Holy Order thinks it was because of a sigil stone found in Orashengrad, but something led this apothecarius to think the cure may be found here. The second page is at the feet of the Thorn King, and things start to become very interesting. Day 14 since my departure. These ruins are without a doubt Pyrean. A skeleton I have found here is the best evidence for this. There are no humans of this size in Enderal these days. Who might this one have been? Although I have only just arrived, I already feel that this journey was worth the time. These ruins hold a secret. It is almost as if the stones were whispering to me, calling out to me. They reach out to me to uncover the secret they are holding. I sometimes feel as if there was a voice, but this must be my imagination. Or could it be? Images flash in front of my eyes, much like memories, but I had never seen these places. 3 rings up in the sky, a gentle ascent to the very top, on golden wings. These cannot be my own memories, can they? What do they mean? I should continue exploring these ruins. There might be something that will guide me towards the remedy. The apothecarius is having some sort of visions, seeing memories of someone else, much like Constantine. We are inside an Ishyian building. Is it possible there is a bound one here? With the Thorn King's key we can open the metallic gate at the entrance, a type of gate typical of Dilgar architecture. What we enter is the most mesmerizing complex of ruins, a place where nature is part of the architecture, an open-air extravagance of both Dilgar and Ishyian structures unique in Enderal, filled with lost ones, spirits, elementals, and more. And things start to make sense. 3 rings up in the sky, a gentle ascent to the very top, on golden wings. The apothecarius saw this room and its elevator, where we find page 3. I remember how I walked along here once, but I was never at this place before. The hallways just seem so familiar to me. The more I think about the mixture of herbs, the more I ponder whether I'll be able to unravel the mystery surrounding the possible antidote. The more images appear before my eyes. Memories that are not mine, familiar images that I had never seen. I just wanted to rest, because it was so exhausting to search the ruins, but when I close my eyes, I have visions of a giant pile drilling through my head, my blood flowing from the wound, and blue crystals sprout from my remains like flowers. The stabbing pain in my head startled me, and I have a feeling that I will find no rest until I know where these images come from. Again and again I see this pile. Huge and cold it rises into the air from a field of blue crystals. The apothecarius is seeing the memories of a binding, the creation of the stone heart of this very place. There is a pile of blue crystals at the end of the Gravespath, inside the glowstone grotto, one of the possible exits of this dungeon. The page might refer to that, or something similar, used to infuse the body of a bound one with crystals. Remember what Constantine said, the bound one suffered atrocious pain, but there's something even more horrifying. Let's get to the important parts. The visions made my head roar, and when I want to cool my face with water, I suddenly see the water crawling into my skin instead of rolling off from it. A torrent grows into my skin and digs a deep crater through my flesh. The pain almost makes me faint. The temple feels the waters excavating its rock, the torrents we see around this place. I jump through colorful leaves. I run with a bear across stones. I fly high above all else, until I'm close to the orange sky. Caution, attention, or I'll fall down. This tells us that the bound ones can project their mind and memories not just into humans, but animals too. I don't want to leave, Mom. I want to stay with you. I must find the cure. I must find a way to cure the red madness. I don't want to dream this, Dad. Let me go. This bitter taste growing stronger, more and more. I cannot breathe. Rot fills my lungs. No, Mom, not Dad, no. I do not know how I got here. My memories are like pages of a book in a storm, wildly flying toward me. Are they really mine? I see a lake, a Mom's face, her tender skin, her huge fangs. Mixed memories, parents administrating a bitter medicine, and images of this century, the small lake and its ugly statue. The formula the apothecarius is researching is not a remedy against the red madness, but a potion used by the Ishyian to paralyze mind and body of the chosen in preparation of a binding. These are the memories of a child being forced the potion, implying the horrid possibility that the bound ones were always children.
Oh, isn't it obvious? Their minds, their spirits, they are fresher, untarnished, faster to adapt. Traits that are indispensable for my work.
Snip, 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 cut through the throat. The head rolls off, the soul's afloat. Snip, 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 cut through the throat. The head rolls off, the soul's afloat. Snip, 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 cut through the throat. The head rolls off, the soul's afloat. Thariel? Yes, Thariel. Back then he still existed. Now he's gone. Now there's only Brother Wrath. He killed them all, you know. Lethal, Wilma, have all of them gone, all dead. We couldn't enter the cold flesh. We screamed. We screamed as loud as we could, because it hurt so bad. But then, that would have made him angry, because then he couldn't concentrate anymore. But what else should we have done? He just hurt so bad. No matter how much of the blue juice he gave us, it always hurt so bad. Yes, he wanted to make us happy. That's what she always said, that she wanted to make us happy. At first I believed him, but then they took Letho. Letho, they just came in and took him into the room. I heard him scream. Hours and hours, and then suddenly silence. Silence for eternity. But I shouldn't talk so much. Too much talking makes the father angry. Just let me sleep, will you? Just sleep.
Atrocious pain. Children have indispensable traits for the bindings, and the father has replicated the formula for them, the blue juice mentioned by Thariel, but not exactly the same one used by the Ishyian, as we read in the last page, found at the feet of the ugly statue. I cannot hear anything anymore. My head is filled with loud screaming, which at the same time is a deafening silence. I feel how someone held my little arms. Why does the pain not end? Again and again, the foul taste in my mouth makes me vomit. Although my stomach must have been empty for a long time now, I spit out a light green liquid over and over, as it caused the taste. Mom and Dad have forced me to drink this. Is this the herbal elixir? Did the visions want to show me what it does? I can see how someone is bending over me. My body is too weak to move. Something moves quickly toward my face, and the pain makes me cry. Then the images that tortured me in recent days are gone. I'm clear again, and my body is burning with pain. I now understand what the visions wanted to show me, where the memories come from, but I wish I didn't know. How can I explain that the cure upon which we have placed our hope is not a cure? That it sets the mind free, as the records have told, but not from illness, but in an unexpected and inhuman manner. What were the Pyreans thinking? How could they create such a mixture? I cannot bring this knowledge into the world. It may not be found. Never again should someone use this elixir. I'm going to destroy this knowledge, cost what it may. I'm so sorry. The apothecarius was spitting out a light green liquid, not blue. A cure that sets the mind free, but in an unexpected and inhuman manner. The apothecarius decided to bring this terrible secret to the grave, probably with some push from the conscience of his sanctuary, and we find his body in the pool below, together with a journal. Here we find what happened before the apothecarius reached the Gravespath, how he decided to leave the monastery for Ark in search for a remedy to the Red Madness, and found a merchant in Fogville with all Pyrean manuscripts, including one about plants. A scholar translated what he could of it, enough to understand it described some formula, and the apothecarius pieced a list of ingredients from his notes. Sheercap, baldric root, whisperweed, and firepalm extract. This last ingredient cannot be found in Enderal, which explains why Father's potion has a different color. He had to compensate somehow. But if we mix the first three ingredients, we obtain a poison or paralysis. The baldric root has a weakness to poison effect, in theory making the potion stronger, and we can imagine the firepalm extract would have some effect on the mind. Which makes sense, as the binding process involved drilling the head of the victim with a pile of crystals. So we are inside a living temple, and the blue crystals around us are part of it. We can notice some red crystals on a side of a sanctuary, mentioned in the first part, caused by the death of someone with arcane fever, as we find a skeleton with mage equipment. But the rest is all part of the Bound One, and with this knowledge we are finally ready to really look at this place. What is actually the Gravespath? After retrieving the final journal, the ghost of an Ishyian appears for the challenge, confirming this quest was about the secrets of the Ishyian. But the place presents both styles. The catacombs with the Thorn King are Ishyian. The root hole with the 3 rings in the sky is Dilgar. The long corridor we access from there is Ishyian, but brings into a cave surrounded by Dilgar towers, then descends again between Ishyian walls to a little Dilgar altar guarded by a Bone Reaper, and a staircase brings up to the door of the final sanctuary, which is all Dilgar in style. It seems this place was important for both castes, probably a place of cult, for rituals may be officiated by the Sun Priests themselves. And what place better than an open-air temple? In our human history, the best-known Sun Priests were in ancient Egypt, after the religious revolution of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, who created the first monotheistic faith, a cult of the sun which denied every other god. The pharaoh made the people abandon the old capital and the old temples, to build a new grandiose city. The peculiarity of the new temples wanted by Akhenaten was that they had no roof, so that the priests could practice their rituals while basking in the light of the sun. The sanctuary is a real open-air room. We can actually descend all the way down to the beach from here. And I think this place is trying to tell us more. 3 rings in the sky of the root hole, and 3 rings around the Pyrean head decorating the entrance of the sanctuary, in a halo of rays of light, a solar symbol for the 3 sun priests. And again in the root hole, strange statues of a dark stone, with unknown glyphs, artifacts not encountered in any other place. Are these the legendary stone tablets of the Ishyian? No idea, but I think I found my thumbnail for the next video. And I do start suspecting 2 things. First, the Bound Ones were a relevant aspect of Pyrean society, and not so rare as Constantine thought. Second, in the last mystery we follow the fire, in this one it seems we need to follow the light. So let's follow it, but aware it could be a trap, as the living temple warned us, and that wasn't the only warning. We have learned by now of various aspects of the Bound Ones. They generate crystals, constant in colors but possibly different between different Bound Ones. They can create illusions, which look and feel real to us, visions, sounds and smells.
Wait, I know that smell. Stay here.
They can also put images and memories directly into our mind, bringing people to madness or even possessing them. Enough to understand many of the strange situations we encounter in Enderal. We have looked at the ruins in the Heartlands, or Ashengrad and Old Odurgrad that are Dilgar, and Old Oleshen Tur, still to visit inside, that are Ishyian. And in the middle of all of this, we have Castle Balor. Pyrean ruins are often in a preeminent location, and what was an important defensive position yesterday is also today. Plus the Pyreans used to build good foundations. In the depths of this castle we find in fact a more ancient Pyrean castle. Its style looks different from everything we visited, but it's an Ishyian castle, given its simple walls, complete with Pyrean traps. But it's not a simple place. Its depths are very intricate and occupied by trolls and croco bandits. It wasn't always so. The castle was occupied by a group of apothecari not long ago, but is now completely devastated. We have retreated from the lower levels. It is steadily approaching. We are an order of healers, not warriors. None of us wants to face the terror from the darkness, which has spread in the depths of Abbalor. We do not know what it is or which of the case chambers it occupies. Maybe it is uncertainty itself, having turned away from anything which is good. Even our studied brother Gildomir is unable to explain it. Instead he is driveling about a red madness. It seems the stone and the earth surrounding our halls have turned against us. The walls are tumbling in. Dreadful, eerie light is pouring in, a light which cannot be from this world. It came crawling from the depths. Anywhere it shines, it freezes to ice. Gildomir told us there was no light, and that we are responsible for it. Maybe he has fallen ill himself. Is he crazy as well, such as all of us? We had not received any response from our brethren on the upper levels, but instead we heard a disgusting and sickening munching. So we are surrounded by madmen above and below. We have to give up our bastion. We had to take flight, or I'll become like Gildomir and all the others. We find Gildomir the madman in the lowest level of his castle, on the throne of a forgotten Pyrean king. It may sound like Gildomir and his brothers fell to the red madness, but it was something even more deadly, the awakening of the conscience residing in this castle. Ultimately the apothecari were possessed by the Bound One and turned to cannibalism. The red madness isn't the only consequence of the approaching of a cleansing. The Bound Ones have awakened and they are out for blood. At Zorpan and Sons in the Undercity we can also find an interesting curiosity, the whistling vase of Abbalor.
Oh, look at that! A sunchild graces me with its presence. What can I do for you?
Nothing that produces any effect, cut content again, but I wonder if it's a Bound One that should make it whistle. Not very convincing, I know, but we find similar cases of possession in other places which don't look Pyrean at first, like the Kinea Grotto, named all Kinea in all versions of the game. A man named Mogar Bitterstone is here praying between the blue crystals. We read why in his tattered diary. I could not avoid killing those straight heretics, may they burn in the scorching sun forever. Now the deity, his spirit seemingly slumbering inside the half-sunken, weathered sculpture, will speak to me again. She tells me stories long lost and forgotten, stories of the Pyreans who once walked this grotto, and asks a favor of me. I had noted the words carefully and kept them safe, so I could fulfill her wish one day. Alas, I'm incapable of leaving this strange, wondrous grotto. I despise the sunlight. It seems to me as if I have always been here. My memories of what was and what is begin to fade, and only as a mere shadow of my former self do I roam about, eternally in service to my goddess. Again a female bound one, like in the living temple. We do not know what her wish was, nor we can see the half-sunken sculpture where her conscience resides. There are also no indications to whether this place is Ishyian or Dilgar, no stones or decorations at all. The next case is more revealing. There's a pretty house in the Whisperwood, with no marker on the map, just west of the ritual site. A place which somehow reminds of home and daddy. While mages had taken over it, and it seems just the usual burn and loot operation at first, until we step into the basement. Bodomir Shadowdance, the boss of this place, is here compulsively eating some human remains. He might seem under the effect of glimmer-cup dust, But look at his eyes.
That was... What the heck? Why by the wise hermit would he do that? His eyes. I've never seen anything like that.
Cannibalism. Just as mentioned in the old book from Abalor, Bodumir is possessed by a bound one. The spot where we find him increases our arcane fever, so it shouldn't even be possible for him, a magic user, to stay there in the first place. This basement looks more solid and older than the rest of the house. I wouldn't say it looks Pyrean, but if we look at the roof of the house we can see Ishyian decorations. This house was built on an ancient ruin, and its elements were reused for its construction. We can imagine that someone lived here a comfortable life, until the Red Madness started, and the Bound Ones became restless. Gildomir, Mogar, Bodumir, Constantine, all victims of the Bound Ones, and they are just some of the cases of possession we encounter in Enderal. However, the presence of the Bound Ones is often much more subtle and not exclusively connected to Ishyian ruins. There are some rare cases where we do find signs of Bound Ones in Dilgar buildings as well. In the Frostcliff Mountains, on the highest point reachable in Enderal, the top of the world, we find Old Inyat. A very impressive construction, already from the toppled towers which lead to its entrance, guarded by many Nerimist soldiers. A place which leaves no doubts about its style. Hanging spheres, polished stone and elaborate decorations, definitely a building of a Dilgar. If we enter from the main door, a long bridge of stone leads us to a maze of interconnected halls, very similar to old Miskamur. And the place is full of Nerimist soldiers. But there are also Starling automatons guarding the rooms, and many machines of unknown purpose. And the Neremis are interested in them, judging from the letter we find in 2 copies around Old Inyat. Commander Sordan, the situation is critical. We managed to discern the Starling, or whatever, machines in the upper levels. However, the deeper we descend into the ruin, the more numerous they become. As of today, we have lost half a dozen good soldiers. In addition, on each new level the air becomes more sultry and oppressive. Since the ruin is surrounded by mountains, we do not have the appropriate attire and equipment to operate under these conditions. 2 days ago, Chronicle Eldrin was attacked by a swarm of mosquitoes, as they are usually found only in Ishyian. He is suffering from a high fever since. Tomorrow I will explore the innermost of the complex with a small raiding patrol. For now, we maintain our position and await further instructions. Without reinforcement and proper equipment, we will not be able to transport the machines. Expedition Leader Merren. The Neremis are interested in the machines. They want to take them away. Maybe they know more about them. But the paper also mentioned that Chronicle Ertrin, a member of the expedition, was attacked by a swarm of mosquitoes, as they are usually found only in Ishyian. Why would there be Nerimist mosquitoes here, in the Frostcliff Mountains? There are not. It's the illusion of a bound one. We find Merren, the leader of this expedition, looking very perplexed at a machine and the chest at its base, so maybe the Nerimists don't know much more than us, except for one detail. What we see is actually part of a small hidden quest that starts at the Bank of Ark.
Hello, how may I be of service?
If we look at the blueprints sought by Siren,
Of course.
we may notice one that costs considerably more than the others, curiously named Koppophon. When we buy it, a mysterious note slips through. I finally found the blueprint of the artifact. Unfortunately, Earthspanker Siren demanded I use some of pennies as a payment. I could only get a glimpse of a blueprint. I am not yet sure if it is genuine, but Siren seems reliable. We had to take the risk. I hope that Expedition Leader Merren will be delighted about my findings. I set out immediately, but the way back to the ruin of the peaks of the Frostcliff Mountains in which we set up our camp is very long and exhausting, but the reward makes the effort worthwhile. Once I arrive, I should talk about our future plans with Merren. I hope that the magical stone he is carrying with him day and night will finally be of help. We will take back what is ours, one way or another. Very strange to find this here, but it tells us that Nerm's spies have infiltrated Ark without anyone noticing, and that Merren brings always with him a magical stone, maybe connected to Old Inyat. Is the stone we find in Merren's chest, Kopp's Soul Gem, named after Marvin Kopp, the composer of a soundtrack we so much love. We can use this to craft a special phonograph called Koppophon, playing a unique song. Nothing we can use in Old Inyat, but it's perfect for home. So the question still remains, what was Old Inyat? Why all these machines? Maybe it was just a workshop for the construction of Starling machines, because the automatons we see around Old Inyat are clearly of Starling design. Which gives us the chance to clarify yet another point about the Empire of Pyra. The Pyreans knew more than we do about the cycle, simply because they did not suffer from the prohibition of studying the ruins of the civilization that came before them, like the Starlings. There are a few Starling ruins around Enderal, like the old Starling mine and the old Starling workshop, which may seem just some other Dilgar ruins at first, but they are actually more ancient places that the Pyreans took over. According to the canon of Enderal, very different in this case from the canon of Nerim, the Starlings were a civilization from a cycle before the Pyreans, as we hear from the Black Guardian.
The Starlings, in their time, were called the Yalam Rashi, and yes, they manipulated the game in their favor. Their goals were similar to mine when I created the Goliath. They were a small circle of highly intelligent craftsmen and mages, and just like myself, they did not think the cycle could be won by the beacon alone. So by unknown means, they fled into the sky and created something that protected their city from the cleansing.
The Starlings originated here on Vin as part of an advanced civilization that disappeared long ago, but they managed to escape the cleansing by building the Star City. The ruins, not many, are still found in Enderal, and the Pyreans studied them, made them their own. That's how they learned to build futuristic machines, and to power them with the energy of crystals. We find in the old Starling workshop an enormous machine, under a vault of huge cylindrical crystals. A machine that seems to be cutting the crystals in pieces. I think this was a crystal mine, of a sort of crystals which can be used as batteries, and the machine is processing them in situ for later use in factories and workshops. Because we don't find ruins of other civilizations apart from the Pyreans, Starlings, possibly the giants for the Ice King's soul, and two places built by the civilization of aged men, much older than anything else, it is plausible that the Starlings were the civilization of the cycle before the Pyreans. But that is not what we are told in the Star City.
Okay.
The Starling prophecies were right. The ancient fathers have lived in this place for eras, maybe eons. And throughout the years, they have documented the rise and fall of every civilization, and we're just about to see their memories of the Pyreans. Correct, and they witnessed all of it. Their creation, their bloom, and their downfall. The same goes for many, many cultures that were before them.
Magistra Yela is basing herself on the Starling prophecies, which we do not know, to say that the ancient fathers witnessed the rise and fall of many civilizations, Therefore, their civilization originated many cycles ago. I'm not really convinced, but I think Yaela knows better, and that the ruins of the Yalan Rashe might just have been more solid and durable than the ruins of the civilizations in between, because of their technological advancements. We'll have to speak about the Starlings another time. The important point is that the Pyreans built their empire on top of the ruins of the civilizations before them, just like Enderal was built on top of the Pyrean ruins. And we often find signs of bound ones, especially when the ruins are Ishyian. If we look at Silvergrow, the village of Rineus, there is old Arkesh in the north, what must have been a very big building, with walls now reaching into the sea and all the way to the end of the coast. The ruin of a waterfall in the west, where Rineus brings us to show his painting, what was maybe once a rich palace, now reclaimed by nature. And Old Yogosh, before the entrance of Silvergrow, a very interesting place where we again find that the Neremis had killed the expedition of the Holy Order, although this time is not soldiers, but a single Neremis scientist accompanied by hired mercenaries. This was a facility to provide this dry area of Enderal with water, and we can reactivate its all-water pump. But Old Yogosh definitely hides more secrets, protected by many well-hidden traps, and who knows what the Neremis scientist here was really looking for. Just like the Apothecarius in the Gravespath, he seems to be consulting an old book, probably a Pyrean manuscript. And there's also the spirit of Yogosh, rising from a pile of burnt bodies, like the ones we have seen in the Living Temple. However, Old Yogosh, Old Arkesh and the ruin of the waterfall are all three Ishyian, and Silvergrow is right in the middle. And already from the interactive map, we can notice the defensive walls and streets of Silvergrow are actually Ishyian too. The whole area is, and the old Noria, a place we cannot visit, and the old silver mine north of the waterfall, also closed, were maybe meant to show us more of its Pyrean origin. But let's look a moment at the town walls and their difference with the ancient Pyrean walls. If we follow these walls to the south, we get to the old silver fortress, a place that doesn't look Pyrean at all, but we have already seen fortresses built on other more ancient fortresses. On one side of the courtyard, jets of water are pouring out of a wall, and weird voices get louder as we get closer to it. The same in a room on the first floor, the voices are louder in a corner, and each time we reload or enter the room we actually hear one of 4 different whispers. I think the water comes from a burst Pyrean pipe, from the ruin under this building, a ruin containing the conscience of a bound one. But I don't think these whispers are from the bound one, as they communicate through illusions and memories, most of them at least. This, and the voice we heard in Old Atolis, they sound more like cursed souls, angry, lost and confused. If we listen carefully to the wind in the rock passage of Old Atolis, chilling screams echo through the rocks, the voices of the wretched souls devoured by a bound one. Is this the destiny awaiting Zara, forever suffering inside a prison of stone and crystals? But not all bound ones are hostile. Some of them are actually trying to help us understand, in their own way. In a corner of Fortress Fogwatch, again a building that doesn't look Pyrean, but where something spooky is definitely going on, we hear something that has no reason to be there. The humming of a beacon, the warning of a bound one. Some bound ones are even straight friendly and communicative, like the wishing wells.
A golden chalice, a grass-colored stone. Bring me back this, so I shan't be alone. Bring my heart back to me.
If there's something that doesn't look Pyrean, it's definitely these wells. But we do know that the Pyreans had a strict relationship with water, and it's not hard to imagine that these wells may be built on more ancient sources. There is a dry well in the nobles' quarters of Ark, and that doesn't look Pyrean either, but if we look at it from the inside, we see ancient Ishyian walls. There's also a small fountain in the farmer's coast, which is actually an ancient broken pipe adapted with a drain. The wishing wells seem to be the only cases where the bound ones are speaking directly to us, and again it is a female voice.
You made me whole again, O strange soul, and for this you shall have my thanks. What is your wish?
Are there any male bound ones at all? I don't know, but the wishing wells speak with the voice of a woman, and I think it means that the bound ones were not always children. Not that it makes it less horrible. Because children are more adaptable, I think they were reserved for bindings of higher level, like important temples, where a stone heart was needed. The Koppophon does not contain a bound one, it's just a mechanism powered by a special soul gem. But I think the whistling vase could be an example of a bound object on lower level, only capable of whistling. But it doesn't make any sound, and there is no real clue. The real reason why I've been showing you bound ones left and right is actually another. They're everywhere because the Pyreans were everywhere. We should think of the Empire of Pyrrha like the Roman Empire, but with magic and technology. Buildings of marble and gold topping the hills, aqueducts distributing water to the cities, connected by streets of stone adorned by arches, temples and statues. The society of Enderal is instead the Renaissance, what Europe became after the Dark Ages. Only in Enderal common knowledge of the Pyreans is lost, like the fact that the streets still in use are actually Pyrean streets. Just like all streets lead to Rome, in Enderal all streets lead to Ark, and the city of 1,000 flats. It seems indeed that the Enderalians are generally not aware they are living on top or even inside Pyrean ruins. Sometimes the building is unchanged from millennia, just repaired here and there, like Monastery Westgard in the Dark Valley, a perfectly preserved Ishyian building until recently used by the apothecary. Sometimes it's cased under a modern building, like Kiero's house, where we find what would look like an Ishyian decoration. And the cave under its tower in Ark 2, the buildings and street might not look Pyrean, but the altar in the middle definitely is. This was actually a dungeon called Kel'Thuzar's Resting Place, inside a fortification removed from the game, where is now Castle Blickstar, and readapted for Kiero's tower. Other times we just see part of the ancient Pyrean foundation, like in the fishing lodge of the port of Ark. The temple of Eralata is also an Ishyian ruin, and every corner of the Undercity actually shows Pyrean stones, pipes, and very concrete clues if we look around, especially at the walls. The cellar of the refuge, more like the crypt of Murad the Faceless. What happened to this guy? And the refuge is not even that deep underground, just under the streets of Ark. But it's not just Ark and the Undercity. Duneville is an ancient Pyrean city, a city of Edilgar, and the people still live inside the towers built thousands and thousands of years ago. And that is normal. There were people living inside the Colosseum during the Middle Ages, and there are Roman buildings still in use now, adapted to modern times. The cities of today are the cities of yesterday. But the Pyreans were more numerous than the population of Enderal, and they had more cities. I think Old Dolturgrad was another city of Edilgar. We have seen some houses still intact inside. Silvergrove was probably an Ishyian city. And we have seen that a city was supposed to be found inside the Forgotten Temple, part of the first ruin we visit. Again a city of Edilgar, and a well-defended one at that, on top of a steep cliff. Which brings us back where we started, the abandoned temple. There is a feeling of power and mystery in this cave. Purple light shining from an unknown mechanism. The relief of a face which reminds of the veiled woman. And the fleshless melody we hear in the living temple when we find our body. Only here there is no music box. The music seems to come from this metal thing. Which begs the questions. Is this an illusion? Are we inside a living temple? And what is this machine? This room is quite strange. There are skeletons on the ground, where we find a key to activate the stairs. But there's also a second key on the right side of the cave, near a skeleton in an interesting pose. Not much information. But this mechanism, although it may seem at first one of the escape pods from the Star City, it's actually just a hydraulic junction. And its parts are basically manhole covers, caps to close pipes and conduits, just as we see in the tunnels leading to the city of 1,000 floods and other Pyrean ruins. In practice, a distraction. Why are we hearing this song in this place? That's the question. This song is a message, and just like in the living temple, there is a bound one here, trying to tell us we are fleshless. Can you hear this whispering when we approach the relief and the humming of a beacon? We do find a beacon in this same ruin, but it is not active, it makes no sound. The sound is only in our head. And this beacon and everything else we see in this ruin might seem at this point also an illusion, but it is not. The beacon appears in our first vision too, but also in the introduction, which shows us an image of his temple, with a humming beacon, the central, round part of an active beacon. So if this beacon is real, why is it here, and why is it active in our vision, like in the aftermath of a cleansing? We should notice this is not a prototype, it's a fully functional beacon, like the one in the Pyrean temple. The prototype is a bit different, it has some connections going up to the roof. The Dilgar were the experts on machines. We can imagine they actually built all three beacons. First because they had the time and resources. They did not find out about the cycle last moment. Second, well, for that we need to apply our freshly acquired architectural wisdom. In which style is built the city of 1,000 floods? Is it Ishyian or Dilgar? One would expect both. It was the capital after all. But if we look at the Undercity, the ruins we visit have all one style, the same plain style. I thought pipes were something only from the Dilgar, but we have seen them in Ishyian places too. And the deeper we get into the tunnels below the Undercity in our search for the Numinos, and into the city of 1,000 floods, we only see Ishyian ruins. The Dilgar would have placed an elevator here, but there are no signs of Dilgar architecture anywhere around, nor their machines. The so-called capital of the Pyreans was exclusively Ishyian. How does that make sense? Well, it does. The Ishyian and Dilgar were collaborating, but they were living completely separated lives. And remember, the Ishyian valued tradition, the Dilgar valued progress. The style of the Dilgar developed at a later moment, inspired by their study of the Starlings, while the Ishyian kept building in the older, traditional style, the style of their oldest city. The Ishyian and their style are older than the Dilgar, and that's why the Thorn King calls them the Old Folk of Ishyian. The culture of Edilgar developed later. They moved out of the historical capital and built their own, which is what I think the abandoned and forgotten temple really are. Now let's look again at the citadel in that old teaser, side by side with the Pyrean temple. Do you see it? They are the same, one Ishyian, the other Dilgar. Which explains one strange line we hear inside Perek's memory, the memory of an Ishyian.
The Dilgar are all dead, and now it's your turn.
The Dilgar are all dead. What does it even mean? How could they be all dead? The attack we saw happens of course before the Ishyian beacon is activated in the city of 1,000 Floods. That the Dilgar are dead means that their capital has been conquered, the place where we find the Dilgar beacon, the abandoned temple. And our first vision of the abandoned temple, with the cleansing light of a beacon and burnt corpses, is the vision of a parallel reality, one where the Dilgar beacon was activated instead, during the attack on their capital. Something that happened just before Perek's memory. We'll have to visit Perek's family in the next part, and many more fascinating places. History teaches us something about the present, especially on Vin, where it actually repeats itself. And now start the music, Marvin. We've learned much in this part about the cycle of the Pyreans, their first era dominated by the giants, then after an unknown cataclysm, the second era of the Sun Priests, how the Pyreans split into Ishyian and Dilgar when they came into contact with the ruins of the Yalan Rashe, and the Dilgar developed their technology while the Ishyian kept faithful to tradition, and about their cities, how Ishyian and Dilgar collaborated while living separate lives, and we've seen some interesting cut content. But most of all, we've learned more about the nature and powers of the Bound Ones. They are found inside objects and buildings, generally marking their territory with crystals. They can talk to us, communicate directly, but they can also create illusions of visions and sounds, read our mind and show us memories of their own. And they can possess and command people, animals and other creatures, use them as defenses or sacrifices. The powers of the Bound Ones are many and treacherous, and this knowledge can help us interpret what we see around Enderal in a practical way. In fact, only now I understand how the situation really stands with Princess Isolon. We are not in her burial hall, there's no sarcophagus. We are in a living temple, the princess is a Bound One, and she's possessing the giant spider. What more can the ruins tell us? A lot more, and every little clue is a step forward in our quest for our most hidden mystery, where even the real question is a puzzle, is pieces buried in the ruins. What was the secret of the Pyreans? That and more in the third and final part of this investigation, the Dark One. Happy hunting, and walk blessed!